The influencer murder case detectives couldn't ignore at first. It looked like just another post, a smiling face, a perfect caption, the kind of content millions scroll past every day without thinking twice. But then, something felt off. The updates stopped. The comments started piling up. And followers began asking the same question. Where did she go? What happened next didn't just stay online. It pulled detectives into a case they couldn't ignore. Because behind the filters, the brand deals, the carefully curated life, there were cracks no one noticed in time. And when the truth finally started to surface, it wasn't just shocking. It was something far darker than anyone following her ever imagined. At first, it didn't look like a crime. There was no breaking news alert, no police tape, no immediate sign that anything was wrong. Just silence, the kind that doesn't feel unusual at first, especially in a world where people disappear from timelines all the time. But this was different. She wasn't just another account. She had built a presence, consistent posts, daily engagement, a routine her followers had come to expect. Stories in the morning, updates throughout the day, replies to comments late into the night, and then nothing. At first, people assumed she was taking a break, maybe traveling, maybe recharging. Influencers disappear and come back all the time. It's part of the rhythm of online life. But days passed, then a week, and the silence started to feel wrong. Comments shifted from casual to concerned. Are you okay? Where have you been? Please update us. Friends reached out privately. Some got no response. Others received vague replies that didn't sound like her. Short, unusual. Almost as if someone was trying to mimic her tone, but missing something subtle. That's when the first real alarm bells went off. Because the people closest to her noticed what followers couldn't. The details were off. Her phrasing, her timing, even the way she interacted. It didn't feel like her. Behind the scenes, concern turned into action. A missing persons report was filed. What had started as online silence was now a real-world investigation. Detectives stepped in. At first, they approached it like any other missing case. They looked at her last known location, traced her recent movements, spoke to friends, family, and anyone who had been in contact with her in the days leading up to her disappearance. And one thing became immediately clear. Her life online didn't fully match her life offline. There were gaps. Certain relationships she rarely spoke about publicly, moments that never made it to her content, details that didn't fit the image her followers believed in. And within those gaps, investigators started finding leads. Her last confirmed sighting became the focal point. She had been with someone who wasn't widely known to her audience. At first, that person wasn't considered suspicious, just part of her private circle. But as detectives dug deeper, that connection became more complicated. Timelines didn't line up. Their account of events shifted in small but noticeable ways. What they said happened didn't fully match what digital records suggested. And in a case like this, consistency matters. PON data showed movement. MAMS revealed tone changes. Location tracking painted a path that raised questions. The more investigators looked, the more that simple silence started to look like something else entirely. Not a break, not a disappearance by choice, but something deliberate. Meanwhile, the internet was catching on. Followers began creating theories, videos analyzing her last posts, comments dissecting every detail, every caption, every expression from her recent content. People who had never met her started forming narratives, trying to make sense of something they felt connected to. But while the online world speculated, detectives were getting closer to something real, because buried beneath the polished posts and curated lifestyle, there was a version of her life that hadn't been fully visible. And it was in that hidden space that the case began to take a darker turn. As detectives pushed deeper into the case, the contrast between her online persona and her real life became impossible to ignore. What her audience saw was carefully curated, bright, controlled, and consistent. But what investigators uncovered told a different story. There were pressures she never spoke about publicly, conflicts that didn't fit her brand, relationships that existed entirely outside the frame. And one of those relationships quickly became central. The person she had last been seen with was no longer just a detail, they were now the focus. At first, their cooperation seemed normal. They answered questions, provided a version of events, and didn't immediately raise suspicion. But over time, that version began to shift. Small inconsistencies started appearing, a timeline that changed slightly each time it was repeated. moments that couldn't be verified, explanations that didn't fully match the digital evidence. And in investigations like this, those small cracks matter. Detectives began reconstructing her final hours with precision. They mapped movements, cross-referenced phone data, and aligned witness statements with what technology could confirm. Every step was measured against something objective, something that couldn't be influenced by memory or emotion. That's when the case turned, because the data didn't support the story. Her phone activity stopped abruptly. Location tracking showed a pattern that ended in a specific place. And after that, nothing. No movement, no signals, no indication that she had left on her own. It pointed to a single, unavoidable conclusion. Something had happened in that final window of time. Investigators returned to the person at the center of it all. This time with more than just questions. They had evidence. Not enough to close the case yet, but enough to challenge every inconsistency. Under that pressure, the narrative began to break down. What had once sounded controlled started to unravel. Details became harder to explain. Gaps became harder to justify. And eventually, the story that had been maintained from the beginning could no longer hold. What actually happened wasn't what anyone online had imagined. It wasn't a dramatic, planned act. It wasn't something that unfolded over days. It was something that escalated in a moment, an interaction that turned into an argument that crossed a line, and a situation that spiraled beyond control. By the time it was over, it was too late. The attempt to cover it up came after. The silence, the vague messages, the effort to make it seem like she was still active, still present, still okay. But digital footprints don't disappear easily, and neither does truth. When authorities made the arrest, it confirmed what the investigation had been building toward all along. The person closest to her in those final hours was the one responsible. The reaction was immediate. Online, everything shifted. Theories that once seemed convincing collapsed overnight. Narratives that had spread across thousands of comments were suddenly proven wrong. People who had followed every update realized how much of what they believed had been built on incomplete information. And that realization hit hard, because this case wasn't just about what happened. It was about how people understood it, how quickly assumptions formed, how easily perception replaced reality, and how the truth, even when it was there, struggled to be heard over the noise. For her family, though, none of that mattered as much as the outcome. What they needed wasn't speculation. It was clarity, an answer to the question that had started it all. What happened? And while that answer didn't bring her back, it did something important. It ended the uncertainty. It replaced silence with truth. And in cases like this, that matters more than anything else. Because the hardest part isn't always the loss. It's not knowing. This story leaves behind something bigger than just a case file. It leaves a reminder that what we see online isn't always the full picture. That behind every curated life, there can be unseen struggles. And that sometimes the most important details are the ones no one ever posts. If this story made you look at things differently, at the lives we follow, the stories we believe, and the truths we assume, then you're already seeing what most people miss. Because not every story is what it looks like on the surface, and not every truth is shared in real time. If you want more real cases, deeper breakdowns, and stories that go beyond what the internet shows you, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who follows true crime, and subscribe to the channel, because the next story might already be unfolding right in front of us.